Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Hey, friend, and welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Esther Littlefield, and I am so glad that you are here today. And I truly mean that. It really means a lot that you take time out of your day to be here and to listen to this podcast. So have you ever felt like no one else could possibly relate to your situation or circumstance? Have you ever been afraid to share some of your deepest pain and struggles as a leader for fear of what other people might think, or worse, potentially losing your leadership role or your job? Have you ever struggled to care for your soul and take time for rest, even though you know it's vital and important? If any of these challenges sound familiar, you're going to want to stick around and listen to this whole episode today. Today, Holly and I are chatting with Bonnie Gray, and our conversation is sure to intrigue and encourage you. Bonnie shares why it's vital to share the truth about your story, even if it involves other people messing up, how panic attacks impacted her leadership, dealing with rejection, and I especially loved what Bonnie had to say about learning from one another's differences and hearing one another's stories to find commonality. Holly and I laughed a lot. We also cheered silently for much of this conversation, and I know that it's going to bless you as well. So let's go ahead and dive in to our conversation with Bonnie Gray. All right. Well, welcome, Bonnie, to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. Holly and I are super excited to be chatting with you today. So to start us off, can you just tell our audience a little bit about you, yourself, and what your leadership looks like right now?
Well, it's interesting because my leadership looks like very different than what I started out doing for most of my life. I am a Bible teacher. I was a missionary in my 20s. My joy is creating new ministries to gather women together. And I like to focus on topics that I feel are usually not addressed. But I had to go through my own personal journey to uncover the secrets of my family. And I actually didn't know that God was going to use it for leadership purposes. My father left when I was 7 years old. And what's unique is that my mother is a mail order bride from Hong Kong. My father was a busboy in a noodle shop, and I was born in San Francisco, Chinatown. Both my parents did not graduate from high school. My story started in a place where it was not of love. My mom did not marry my father because they loved each other. It was because they wanted to immigrate their family from Hong Kong to America. Now, I never felt these parts of my stories would be used for leadership purposes, or I didn't see how this fits into God's kingdom. Everything I went through privately between Jesus and me. So I felt like I would share the overcoming stories of how I was strong and how God helped me through my hard times, but I did not want to dwell too much or talk about these I felt at the time, shameful or broken things in my past. Like I felt when Paul said, forgetting what's behind us to press towards the goal, I was the press towards the goal girl. Okay. So I did not want to go back in my past. Like that to me at the time, before I went on the Sweet Like Jasmine journey, was just kind of my past. Let's leave it there and let's go towards pressing the goal and helping others get towards Jesus.
Yeah. So you kind of touched on it already, but can you tell us about your leadership journey and maybe when you actually realized you were a leader?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So from very young age, like as a little girl in church, I would see like the high schoolers had their own group. They would get together once a week. And I was like, I would go to my pastor and I was like, I was only in third grade. Okay. But I said, why don't we kids have a weekly meeting? I said, can we get somebody to start one for us? And so I started at that young age in third grade, started this kids group. I said, I would love to do a Bible study. I said, because I'm an early reader, Holly and Esther. So to me, studying the Bible really wasn't about uncovering the truth. It was more like, I love the Bible. I love these stories. And so I was kind of natural at it. And so I didn't know it at the time. I was just kind of a natural step in front. I'll say what other people may be thinking, but they won't say it. So my leadership journey, in fact, started when I was a little girl. And then it continued on to, college. That was just where I found the most joy, being able to connect with other women because my home life was so broken and chaotic. That's where I found the most joy, is just with other women of faith. And I didn't know it, but apparently I have a natural knack to just kind of rally people to come together and talk about stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such a gift for a leader to have, to be able to bring people together. I love that. In our leadership journeys, usually we are learning lessons along the way, sometimes making mistakes, sometimes hitting some great big goals. But could you share with us a little bit about any lessons that you've learned on this journey as a leader?
Yeah. So as a leader, like I said, when I first started out, a lot of kind of my natural personality to be optimistic, they actually came from my family because I was the oldest in my family. So I was always kind of the encourager. I want to lift people up. And so God really used it in my leadership abilities. But my leadership lesson took a unique change when I started experiencing panic attacks. When I became a mom, I had already been a missionary. I work in Silicon Valley, so I was doing like Bible studies at work. I just really felt like I was already in my zone for what God's calling in my life would be. But when I started having panic attacks as a new mom, that was really scary for me because I was like, what is that going to mean for me as a leader? I was a Christian author at the time. I was the trainer Bible study leader in my church. I was involved in a lot of different parachurch organizations, volunteers up to 400 people for a Christian conference I was leading. It just didn't fit into this leadership life that I felt God was calling me to live. And it was scary because I didn't want to tell anybody. Because I was afraid if somebody knew I was having panic attacks and anxiety and depression, they would tell me, oh, girl, you've got to see a therapist. And I was afraid the church elders would tell me, you need to take a break. You need to take care of yourself. And to me, as somebody that kind of lived for that joy of being with others, that would be the death knell for me, is that if I couldn't serve God. So that was really the biggest lesson I had to learn, is that maybe one way God was calling me to serve him in my life, it doesn't mean that's the only way to serve him. It's who I am that makes my life a ministry to God. I didn't know at the time. My panic attacks were so severe that I would wake up choking every night, every 2 hours. I didn't know it at the time, but I had PTSD. I went to a therapist. I was very secretive because I didn't want anybody to know. And I thought, okay, let me just take care of this on the side. Nobody needs to know that Bonnie Gray had panic attacks. And my therapist said within a minute of hearing my symptoms, because I had no idea why. I'm not worried. I have a loving marriage. I wasn't living with my mom anymore. I had 2 beautiful boys, kind of like I was listing all the great things that happened in my life. And I didn't want him to think my faith was flawed. That's kind of the biggest fear that we as Christian leaders have. We're afraid if we tell people maybe some of the emotional struggles we're going through, like, oh gosh, I can't fall asleep at night. Or, you know what? I'm waking up in a fog and I don't know why I'm obsessing over this problem. We're afraid people will say, oh, is there something wrong with your marriage? Oh, is there something wrong with your family? Oh, you need to pray more, or you need to study the Bible more. Like, I know for myself, those are my fears. So as I was telling this Christian therapist, kind of like listing all my justifications, so he doesn't think I'm a bad woman of faith, like my identities as a leader was wrapped up in those things. by God's grace, there's no shame in it. God used it. But I think what I want to say is that our leadership is organic. God guides us into different seasons. And so what the therapist said at that moment changed my life, because he said, well, Bonnie, did you know that verbal abuse and emotional abuse has the same impact as physical abuse? So your panic attacks and anxiety and depression is not about something wrong with you right now. It's about things that have happened to you in your past. And I still was in denial because I said, no, but I've overcome everything. God's using me. And he said, but Bonnie, you don't realize that your faith is strong. It's not because your faith is flawed. It's because you've done good, girl. Now you're finally at a safe place in your life. Just like a soldier, he doesn't experience panic attacks when he's on the battlefield. It's when he comes home. And when he's safe, that's when his body, the way God created our nervous system, it relaxes and your body can experience the things you could not at the time. So you need to use your faith in a different way. You need to use your faith to heal. That, my friends, changed the trajectory. It went from shame to now, oh, God, you have a new mission for me. So that leadership quality that God's given us, it's a spiritual gift. It's a gift of leadership. Suddenly God turned it towards my emotional health and well-being. Oh, this is the new place you want me to serve you. Okay. I said, God, I will go back into my past to explore all these areas that I had once been wounded. But I said, here's the deal, God. I will tell everybody and anybody, whatever you teach me, whatever lessons you have to show me, I will do it. But here's the deal, God, I need to hear from you. You need to tell me what's the purpose in all this, because I still didn't get it at the time, because, this is a part of my identity that I've never lived. I've never shared, oh, this happened to me when I was a child, or this happened to me in college. So God was showing me a new way of leadership, which is vulnerability, authenticity, and honesty.
I'm so glad that you shared that, because so many of we know just based on statistics that so many of us deal with mental health issues, and that probably a big percentage of those people are leaders. And so if we don't bridge the gap between those two things, that you can in fact lead, there are times you need to take a break. There are times you need to stop and heal, but you can also do these things at the same time. And I'm just so glad that you are talking about this, because it's so important. I'm curious, when was that first time you shared this struggle with someone outside of your therapist? And how did that go for you?
I love this podcast. Holly, thank you so much for asking me that question. You are a leader. You're asking questions that maybe wouldn't have been asked. I'll be honest, because we're here among our own people here. I'm safe. It did not go well. One of the first people that I shared this with, I shared it with a Christian counselor in our church, because she had known me, because I'm part of kind of the lay pastor. I was leading a singles ministry. I was single until my 30s. I didn't fall in love until my 30s. And I thought I had this gift of singleness. So I was like, okay, if I'm going to be single, I then might as well serve others with this. And so I was known among the pastoral staff for decades. I was pastoral intern. And she said to me, Bonnie, I think you must have some hidden sin that you're not confessing. You must not be trusting God. I think, and this is where, interestingly enough, she's like, because a lot of leaders, they put their identity in their performance. And so, maybe it's your pride. Oh my gosh, even now it's like, I just want to cry, because it's so emotional. It's so raw. And I came to her, and it's so hard as a leader to confide. And yet she said this to me, and, it's okay that I'm crying, because I've learned that our tears are really just a signal that we're being our true selves. And it hurt me so much, because it wasn't true. And so I just want to affirm every woman that's listening here. There's some people that don't understand the journey of healing, and they haven't lived and experienced it. But I learned that it gave me a deeper compassion for those of us who have been wounded in the church. So I didn't use it. It didn't turn into bitterness. Remember, I was sharing with you, as a leader, my mindset was heart was, God, whatever happens to me on this journey, as long as you show me what's the purpose and how I can use it to bless others later, I'm all for it. You've led me through to the mountaintops. That's where most of my leadership has been, the mountaintop. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm the teacher and let me encourage you. But God was saying, I have a different way of leadership. I've chosen you because of the life you've lived and the brokenness that you've experienced. I'm choosing you. And this is not just for the broken people, by the way. I'm doing a book club right now, and there's many women that are in the ministry that grew up in beautiful, happy families. And yet somewhere along the way, it doesn't mean we don't have brokenness. I think that's another message I want to share amongst us here, is that we can have a beautiful, loving family, loving church, and yet we can struggle in our marriages. We can struggle with our children. Like, gosh, my children hurt me. These are a lot of things as encouragers we hide. Yeah. And so we have to free each other. I loved how you said it, Holly, is that life doesn't have to be perfect in order for us to be leaders. We're not disqualified as leaders just because there's brokenness or there's struggles. And in fact, that's going to be the fuel that empowers us. That's what's authentic about why we love the way we do, why we want to be an encourager. And I found through this new path that my ministry has flourished as I actually step out and share these stories of my struggles. Like, wow, women are now feeling very safe and comfortable with me. And it's taken on a whole new level that I never experienced previously. There's women that I've done Bible studies, trainings for, like in some cases for a decade. I never knew what they had gone through as a child, as a woman in their 20s, or even right now, like certain struggles they have. Well, guess what? Since I started sharing these stories, wow, we are so much closer. And I don't feel like I have to put on a hat or put on a role of the quote unquote leader and just be myself. And more women are now being able to feel comfortable. And so the ministry has gone to another level, which is at the soul level, where I'm not just lonely. So like every time I serve, it's not like, okay, I got to get myself to be on. I need to, only serve them by the things that I know in my head. And so the great commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. I've been a leader previously with my mind, teaching the truth, sharing the truth. And that is important. But the heart is where we serve others. That's where we're committed. We're devoted. The heart is a seat of decision-making and our commitment. But there's also the soul level, which I never knew until I went on my own healing journey, which is one way I can be a leader is by sharing how I experience the truth. And that means I need to share the valleys in my life. I need to share the parts where they were quote unquote private between Jesus and I. Now I know the word is lonely. I used to call it, that's private between me and God. Now I realize actually I was pretty lonely as a leader.
Yeah. Wow. I just love what you're sharing, Bonnie. And I think what you said, your new way of leadership being vulnerability, I think that's so powerful. And it's something that I know Holly and I are very on board with because we have found that in our own lives. Like the more vulnerable a leader is, the more open a leader is about their true struggles, the easier it is for the people in their community to do the same. But you also referred to your healing journey. And I think sometimes that vulnerability thing can be taken a little too far to the point of, this is just how I am. I'm a broken person. We're all human. We all have flaws. And we don't actually go on the healing that God wants to provide for us and, restoring of sin if there is sin and things like that. So could you share with us a little bit about what that healing journey was for you and how you walked through that?
Yeah. Now everybody's unique. So I can only share mine. But my mindset again is when I wanted to heal is what is God you wanting to show me? And what are the changes you want me to make? That is just my mindset in general as a leader. So I knew if God's going to take me through it, it wasn't just to wallow in my victimization. That's just not my identity. I know that. So that's why I was telling you earlier, I said, okay, God, if you want me to go back there, because I don't want to, like, what's the point? I'm very honest with God. I said, I don't see what the point is, God. But at the time, my body was telling me the way God created our bodies, as I learned more about PTSD, it's like, you don't get to get a pass, Bonnie. Your faith is not an eraser. So I said, okay, if you're going to take me there, you have to show me there needs to be a purpose. Like, what are the changes I need to make? And what is it that I'm going to learn? And so as I went back to those places in my life that were wounding to me, and God will show you what are the changes that we need to make. What are things I need to do differently? And interestingly enough, those are the hardest ones. Those are the things that we hold on to, meaning like, I don't want to change this thing that's going on with my mom, or I've been dealing with this fine, like it's been working for me. And God's saying, actually, it's not. So we're going to have to make some changes. So that is where I would say it's the difference between just being in our wounds and hurting and saying, okay, every time God shines a light on something, he's always going to be, asking us to grow. He's always going to be challenging us. So the faith step is, first of all, being aware of what that need is. And then second of all, always asking the question and being brave. Okay, God, I'm willing to obey. Whatever it is you need me to change, I'm going to do it. So I don't know if that answers questions for you. One of the first things I did was I needed to go find my father because I need to know, is he dead or alive? Where is he? And it's always very personal. The things God has us change are never just like general. They're very personal. So every woman that's listening, there's something that maybe God wants to bless you with, meaning it's time for you to acknowledge it's okay if you're not okay. It's important that you create space for yourself. God doesn't just love you because what you can do for him. God doesn't love you for just what you can do for others. Actually, he's more interested in how you're doing. And if you are gifted as a leader, when you address how you're doing, it will naturally be connected to what you're going to be doing to serve him. It will. I mean, I didn't see it at the time, but it always is. And so one of the things that changed in my life is that I had to go back in the past and try to find my father and break the old family code that, I'm defined by what I can do for others. I didn't really believe that because I'm like, I've never had that voice in my life that said, hey, Bonnie, how are you doing? How are you feeling? I never had that voice. So to me, it didn't seem like it was very necessary, but it affected my parenting. So previously, for instance, and that's the first stage of leadership for those of us who are, parents, is our ministry to our children. We're building a new legacy. And so previously to Sweet Like Jasmine and wellness and healing, when my kids had difficulties, whether in school or whatever it is I'm teaching them, my first response is always to teach them the truth. This is what you need to know, child. 1, 2, 3. I need you to do this. I need you to just be obedient and just do it by faith. Okay. Like if you have difficulty understanding it, then you're going to have to work through it. Because that's the way I talk to myself. That's how I spoke to myself. It didn't matter how you felt. You need to just, move past it and get it done. But after my own journey towards healing, I realized my first place of ministry to my children, just like Jesus ministered to me, is, okay, tell me what's going on. I can tell you're really upset. You're so frustrated. I'm sorry. It's just, I know it doesn't feel fair. What's going on? I want to ask questions to listen. Another thing is if they're having, a difficult attitude. Previously, I would just be, telling them, look, you need to correct your attitude. Da, 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 da. And before I do correction and teaching now, I'll say like, you know what? Let me make you a smoothie. I'm going to go to Safeway later today. I know you love like cookies, Nestle cookies. Let's have some cookies tonight. It's like, it's so different. The response I get, it's like the softening. And then after we have the cookies or after the, the smoothie or whatever, I'll say, you know what? I just want you to know when you said that to me, I want you to know how that made me feel. It made me feel really like sad, because it hurt my feelings. You probably didn't know that, but I just want you to know that's how it made me feel. Wow. My sons now, they're just like disarmed. And I let them into my story. Now, I know you don't want to hear this, son, but I'm just going to let you know it's really important that you do these things. It's going to help you. I know you're not happy about it. I am just seeing a totally different response from my sons as I learn myself to nurture my soul. I know how to draw my son into my story, let him be more aware of who I am as a person. It's really deepened my relationship as a parent.
I just think it's so important. The topic that you're hitting at here is just that this call to growth. And this reminds me of something I heard Beth Moore talk about one time is, we feel like as leaders or as Christian women, we're bringing our shiny like tomato or whatever to God. Like, here's the fruit. It's all done. I've already done it. And we forget that he's a gardener. He wants to grow with us. He wants to prune us. He wants to feed us. He wants to get rid of the things that are disease. Like, we forget that the whole process of this is growth with God, not here's the product at the end. And I love that you're talking about this because so many of our listeners as Christian leaders feel that way. We have to be already done and show everyone our nice prize fruit or vegetable, whatever, when people need to see us being pruned, they need to see us being fed, they need to see us interacting with our gardener and how we do that, because that only helps them in their growth. So I love so much that you're talking about this because we all need to be reminded of this, I guess. I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about, you've had so many varying experiences. You were an engineer in Silicon Valley, you're a missionary, ministry entrepreneur, and now an author. And so these feel like so many pivots. And I'd love to know what you've learned from all of these different pivots over your lifetime.
Yeah, I think that's what's fascinating is that all these pivots, they kind of happened accidentally. And I think that's the message I want to give to all our listeners is that we're never stuck in a cookie cutter form or mold. And that whatever's happening in our own lives, because we're gifted as leaders, God is going to use. And I think that that's a big lesson through all these different pivots, because I never wanted to pivot. I never felt like, oh, yes, it's so clear. Yes, God, now you're leading me to this ministry. And I just want to give freedom, because sometimes we pray for clarity, but really God wants us to step out in faith. If we're a leader, that means we're trailblazing. That means we're doing things that there's nobody around us doing, okay, or very few. As a leader, we're stepping out in our own lives first. So I think it's exciting to be a leader because life is never the same. And that's what God does. God, the scriptures say that he walks us around to release a fragrance of Christ. Maybe this season, it's like parenting. Oh my gosh, God, why aren't you helping me with this child? Or it's my marriage. Hey, it was going fine. It was working. And, I duct taped it and everything's looking good. And oh my gosh, it's not working, and we might be like, the way I felt, which is, oh no, God, this is ruining my leadership. Why aren't you fixing this? Or why aren't you helping me? And God's just lovingly saying, no, girl, you've done great. I just want you to blossom and bloom. Just like you said, I want to use this in this area. I'm walking you through this life shaped by your experiences, because that's where I want to use you next. So to me, that is exciting thing. I guess goosebumps. I feel so honored and privileged. And each of us, oh my gosh, I just want to cheer you guys on. I mean, if I had time, I want to hear each of your stories. What's happening right now? Because I'd be like, girl, that's where God wants to use you. That's where God wants you to lead right now. That's how brokenness is made beautiful. That we go first. As leaders, we go first. Okay. Nobody else is talking about it. Oh, why? Okay. Because you're the one, your life, whatever that is. So you're shaped. And so I mean, that's why I learned through my own journey through mental health well-being, the encouragers or leaders, you guys have a special spot in my life. In my heart, because one of the first things God had me go speak, which was a surprise to me, I was the first civilian to be invited to go lead a soul care retreat to the officers of the 101st Airborne Division of the U.S. military. Okay, that's the famed group that took the beaches of Normandy that turned the tides of World War II. I'm a 5-foot Asian girl that's never even doesn't know anybody from the military. I was born in California. Let's get real here. Okay. I don't know anybody from the military here. I've never even seen a rifle before in my life. And so here I am in front of the officers, not the infantry, not the front lines. These are the leaders. They said, we want you to come talk to the leaders in the military, the strongest people that send men into battle, because they need soul care. These are the people that shoulder the most responsibility, being strong, and yet we're the ones that have to feel like we have to carry our own burdens. So we need to be there for each other. We need to have that safety. And I had to start creating new friendships in my life, because I was telling you about that first person I talked to. It was not safe. it was very hurtful. I realized I need to find some new kind of friends. And I didn't even know how to do that because, when you're used to being a leader, every time I had coffee, I was having coffee with people that were doing ministry together.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, I don't even know who I would talk to. So I realized, oh my gosh, okay, this is a new journey. I need to find some new kind of friends, what I call soul friends, people that I can talk to that are good listeners and know about this journey. So that was new. But I guess what I'm sharing is that encouragers, leaders, we need that even more than other people. Can I just say that?
Yeah.
Like we need soul care. We need safety, maybe even more than others because we're pouring out all the time. We need constant filling up.
Yeah. So good. So good, Bonnie. This is such a powerful conversation. So you wrote a book called Sweet Like Jasmine, and you referenced this a little bit ago, and you referenced a little bit of the story. And in the book, you talk about this issue of loneliness and going from loneliness to belonging as a Chinese American. So I'd love for you to share first, before we kind of get into some of the things you share in the book. How did the book come about? Would you tell us the backstory?
Okay, here we go. We were talking about it before we recorded the podcast. And you guys are pretty special. You guys are the leaders. You're going where a lot of people have not asked me about. So 10 years ago, I actually found this birth certificate that, launched me into this curious journey because I was just really looking for my older son's birth certificate. I just had baby Caleb and Josh was 3 years old. And I named them Josh and Caleb intentionally because I said, I want to build a new legacy of faith. And at that time, I thought it meant erasing my past, starting new, writing a new creation. And I stumbled on my own birth certificate because I needed to get that kid into preschool. Any mom who's had a baby and has an older child knows, hey, I want him to be making popsicle stick art, cutting up paper for a few hours so I can have some sanity with his baby. And I stumbled on my own birth certificate and I looked closely and it said Chinese hospital. And I was like, why is there a hospital named Chinese hospital? It's the only hospital in America that is named after a race. And I looked closer and it reminded me that my mother was 18 years old when she had me. And it said that the residence was on the same street as the hospital. And I'd never been back because once I got married, I really relished the thought of being a new creation. I'm like, yay, that's me. No problem here. Like, let's get rid of the past. I never went back to Chinatown. Just wanted to forget about it. But then I was curious because I knew one day my sons would ask me, where is grandpa? And because I didn't care, because I was like, well, my dad doesn't care about me, then I don't need to know where he is. But I realized my sons are going to ask me one day, why don't we have a grandpa? I wouldn't even know what to say. I married a Caucasian. So my kids are half Chinese American. And I realized they're also going to ask me, wait, when did we come to America? I had no idea because my mom was the mail order bride. And my dad was the one that was in America at the time. I don't know when he came. So I realized, you know what? I don't want my children to have the shame of what I carried, which was, I don't even know my story. So that launched me into this kind of mystery, fact-finding mission. This happened 10 years ago, Esther. And I actually was ready to tell the story because I was like, from a storyteller standpoint, I was fascinated by what I discovered. Okay. I was like, whoa, I need to tell this story. And I need to tell this story for all the reasons we talked about in the podcast. Like people need to know, we don't need to hide our stories. Anyhow, publishers and agents said to me, that's nice, Bonnie, but there is no market for Asian American stories of faith. I was like, I actually entered a short film contest by Don Miller. And he was going to give $1,000 to anybody that could tell their story, unique story, because it was for A Million Miles, which was his book about the importance of story. And he said, if you can tell your story in 90 seconds, all the readers voted for who would win. And in 90 seconds, I told my story about having a mail order bride for a mom and a busboy in a noodle shop for a daddy. And he left me, the whole 9 yards. And in 1 second, place, which was huge. The winner was somebody who did an all-night visual to help starving children in Africa. So I'm happy that guy won. Okay. No qualms about it. But the fact that I came in second, I was like, you know what? This proves it's very compelling. People wanted it, but the publishing industry, different publishers, I shot my book around and the agents, they said, that's nice. You can share this story with your family, but that's not a demographic. That's not the target audience in Christian book publishing. And I said, no, I'm not trying to share this story with Asian Americans. I mean, my readers are 99.99% Caucasian. They're not Asian. Like, this is a story for everybody. This is not about being Asian. But they said, well, that's just not our target audience. We don't think that's marketable. So I was just so crushed because as somebody that, had been abandoned by my father, that had, like abandoned emotionally by my mom is not a safe person. Okay. It's hard to say it again, but we're breaking taboos. It's easier to say, oh, my father was distant and wasn't there for me. It's hard as Christian women to say, you know what? My mom is pretty toxic. Anyhow, so I was like pretty hurt by it, even though I understood from a business point of view. I get it. If you feel that's true, then, what can I do? But God just kept putting this story in my heart, and through, the support of my sweet readers, I just viewed it as the Apostle Paul. Hey, if one door closes, God, and, Apostle Paul was kicked out of different places, right? So I just viewed it from my leadership spiritual viewpoint. I said, okay, what do you want me to write then, God? So I published 2 books. And then by God's grace, I found a new agent that believed in diversity. And so here's Sweet Like Jasmine. It's here 10 years later. So listeners, do not give up. If somebody says, no, you feel rejected, whether it's a church member, or anybody you hold in authority, it doesn't make it true. If somebody says you're not worthy, your idea is not worthy, we don't see a place for your ministry idea, or somebody says something else hurtful to you as a leader, or somebody you're serving, those break our heart, right? Because we want to serve people, and then somebody says something that hurts us. Just because somebody says it doesn't make it true, sisters.
I just want to be like, preach it. So the book is about this journey of you finding belonging. And then, as you're trying to get this book out, people are saying, no, you don't belong here. No, you don't belong here. Right. So it's kind of like an inception thing, what you're talking about and then what actually happened in the book. So I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about any thoughts or advice for leaders who do feel lonely, who don't feel like they belong, or who may be a minority in their space. What advice or thoughts do you have for them? I mean, I know you just kind of shared, like, if someone tells you it's true, that doesn't mean that it's true. Like, what other things can you encourage our listeners about in that arena? Because you've obviously dealt with it multiple times.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think the most important thing that I would say, as you're feeling lonely and rejected, is that, first of all, you need to know that your experience is valid. And if we look at Jesus, I mean, that's all he experienced in his life. So it's almost like, I would say it's a sign that you're onto something really important. Okay. Because people reject what's different because they don't understand it, or they're afraid to go there. So first of all, I want to just affirm and validate you that we're just walking, with the cloud of witnesses. Moses, he was rejected. I mean, once he went back to free the people in Egypt, they're like, what are you doing? We don't like your idea. Like, what? You're making my life worse. And so there's so many time and examples of leaders that, Apostle Paul, our beloved Apostle Paul, I mean, he had all the credentials and yet he was rejected. So you're in good company, and I would say one thing that I didn't do earlier in my leadership journey, as you'll find in Sweet Like Jasmine, is I didn't share it with anybody. I just felt like, okay, I don't want to discourage anybody. I don't want to expose the truth because I cared so much about the church or the other leaders that I didn't want to share what somebody said to me that was hurtful, because I didn't want them to think badly about the church. I'm very protective of people and ministry. So even though they hurt me, I felt like it was incorrect. Okay. Incorrect. I felt that it was my responsibility to protect them because I wanted to protect God's reputation. But, God showed me through my healing journey, he's bigger than that. He doesn't need us to protect his name by hiding the truth. If somebody has hurt you and wounded you, God wants you to share that truth. Now, we don't share it in a way of bitterness, like, oh, I'm going to get back at that person. It's more like, I'm sharing this because it's important to know that this can happen. And in fact, it happened to me. And so we start first by safe people that are mature, right, in our leadership circles that would understand we're not trying to speak badly about somebody, but we need that healing. We need to know. So previously, I would bypass all that. But once I started having anxiety and panic attacks, I realized it did affect me emotionally that I didn't share anybody. with anybody. So that's really important, is that you really do need to share it. Your feelings are important to God, and you need to find that safe person. And then second of all, we don't have an obligation to protect the people that have wounded you. Because if that happened to you, that means God wants you to help another woman that is experiencing it. Whether it's church verbal abuse, girlfriend stabbed you in the back, something happened to you in ministry. Find a way. Where can I share this? Look for it. Because once you tell God, I recognize now, wow, there's power in sharing the fire I've walked through. Watch out, because God's going to bring that moment to you. And so I would just say, I would want to just lift up the sister, that it's important that we recognize forgiveness doesn't mean eraser. Forgiveness just means I'm not going to treat you the way you treated me. And I'm not going to keep looking to be validated by you. I let you go. I don't expect you to apologize anymore. I'm just giving you a free pass by God's grace, because God has something else for me to do, to use that pain to serve others and to help others. So I'm not going to keep waiting for you to give me that validation or to apologize. I'm freeing you. That's forgiveness. Okay. But reconciliation takes two. Reconciliation takes two, meaning if God's given me a message, I'm not going to stay silent, because I'm going to protect your feelings. Jesus said, who's my mother? Who's my father? Who's my brother or my sister? He said, anybody who does the will of God. So sister, you have a message and you're not obligated to protect the person. Now, I'm not saying, drag that person's name through the mud. I mean, in my book, you'll see, I don't name names, but you need to tell what you've seen. When Jesus was erected from the tomb, he gave Mary Magdalene very few words. I mean, I always every time I read that scene, I'm always like, Jesus, why'd you disappear so quickly? But Jesus just said, go back and tell them what you've seen. That's all he gave her. And she didn't have very much. So all we're called to do is to testify, meaning this happened to me and this is how it is. And trust me, when you do that, oh my gosh, people are going to be sharing their stories with you. They're like, oh my gosh, me too. Or not me too, but something like this happened to me.
Right. Yeah. And this really just circles back to what you shared earlier about vulnerability and the importance of having that as the forefront of your leadership. So I love that. I'm curious, because just as you're sharing your journey, I'm wondering how much of healing took place in the book writing. I know that the story that you write about, I'm sure healing took place as you experienced the story, but what about the actual writing of the book? Did that impact your healing journey?
Oh my gosh, I've got best friends. Where do you guys live? Where are you? I'm here in San Francisco, California.
We're I'm in Maine.
And I'm in Florida.
We're just all over the edges of the country.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that will be cool. Yeah, if I ever travel over there to speak, I mean, we'd need to grab
East Coast. We're East Coast girls. So.
Yeah, exactly. Beautiful. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I love this question, because I was like, how can I tell the story? Then I had the burden. When it was finally contracted, it's been a 10-year journey, right? I felt the weight. Oh my gosh, how can I tell these stories so that they're edifying and empowering, but they're also authentic and honest? What's that balance, And I was totally stressed out, because it happened during the pandemic. I have two kids, they're 12 and 15. They're distance learning. It's total craziness. I've never written with people in the house. I usually write when the kids are in school. Are you serious, God? During this most important story I'm going to tell, and these stories I'd never wanted to share with anybody because of your healing power. You want me to share. You want me to write this with two kids at my home with me, who are just stumbling through COVID and everything. You guys know we've all been through it, right? This is really a tall order. I had writer's block. I was writing a chapter, I had 10, 20 different versions, because I was okay, I need to emphasize this point. Oh, wait, no, that I need to do it this way. I was just, all the anxiety was flaring up. And I found that I lost my voice. Do I say this as an encourager? Do I say this as a comfort? Do I do this as a, fighter, speak the truth? I mean, there's so many different ways to tell the story. And now for us to do ministry, sometimes we just analyze it so much because we just feel the weight of wanting to do it right, that I suddenly lost my compass. I don't even know what I want to say anymore. I don't even know how to tell it anymore. And so I suddenly went from, like having a story to like feeling like, gosh, I wouldn't even know what to say. Maybe I'm going to say it wrong. And it wasn't until I actually was doing a study on Moses. And I was just like, so like late in my deadline, I'm like, how am I going to do this? I read about the scene where Moses said, I can't do this, God. He's at this burning bush. God gave him a big assignment, right? He's like, no, thank you. Like this, I don't want to do this and I can't do this. Because he had to go back and face the people that he ran away from, right? Where he made mistakes. He killed somebody. He's like, no, it's not going to work. Like, I don't want to do that. I like taking care of the sheep here. It's going really well. I've done this for 40 years now. It's good. I like it here. And God said, no, I want you. I choose you. And what did God tell him to do? He said, look at the staff in your hand, throw it on the ground. And that's when the staff turned into a snake. And right then and there, God gave me the power. He said, Bonnie, I just want you to throw your words down. It's just a staff to you. It's just like this stick, but I want you to throw your words down. Let me do the work. Let me change it into something that's meaningful. You don't need to find what the meaning in is this. I want you to tell your story. I want you to throw your words down. And once I got that, I was like, I got it, God. I wrote this book in first draft, girls. I wrote this book in first draft. There's so many stories to tell, right? I mean, my desk was like an Othello game board, meaning all bases loaded. I put down all the different stories I could tell, and there were more than 28. There's 28 chapters here, but there were more than 28 stories. I didn't even know which ones to choose. But after I got that image of Moses throwing his staff down and God using it to turn into a snake, I was like, I got up every day and I just looked at certain words, whichever one that somehow touched my heart, I picked it up, and that's how this book was written. So the 28 chapters in this book right here, the ones that were chosen, was done in that fashion. I just looked at all the index cards and like, okay, candy store. Okay, medicine cabinet. I have no idea why God wants me to write it, but I'm just going to write it and tell honestly, authentically what happened to me. And then that's the book. And I was so surprised because I kind of believed the lies that I was told 10 years ago. Like, maybe nobody wants to hear these stories. And I thought, well, as long as I'm faithful, at least I did that. It's almost like, okay, well, maybe I'll just sit on the shelf. Well, I showed this book cover to my readers in May when I first finished the manuscript, and it became #1 new release in Christian biographies. I share this humbly because I was like, okay, well, I'll just be faithful. Probably people don't want to hear it. No interest, no market. That's what I was told. Guess what? This is not true. People were like, oh my gosh, your mother's a mail order bride. What? And then I had 28 different titles, like topics. And I was invited to be on the Hour of Power TV show in the Crystal Cathedral. And here are the different topics that Bonnie can talk about. And guess what they wanted me to talk about? My sexual assault, my first year in college. And I was like, what? I don't want to talk about that. Come on. There's so many other topics. Nope, that's what we want you to talk about. So see, that's what I'm saying. It's like, that was one chapter I would not have put in. I was talking about all the index cards. I was putting it in. I'm like, no, I take it out. No, put it in, take it out. But whatever, God somehow put it on my heart. Put it in, Bonnie. Because, I didn't want that to be my identity. Oh, the girl that was sexually assaulted in college, I don't want that to be out there. But God says, I'm going to shine my light through it. I said, okay, here it goes. So it's just amazing. When we're talking about Christian leadership, it's funny the things that maybe we feel like, I don't know about this. God's like, that's the one I want you to shine the light on.
That takes a lot of courage, I think. And honestly, really trusting God with how he's going to use that, because the world can malign those things really quickly. And so I guess I just want to sort of applaud your courage and your trust in God in that area, because when we talk about being vulnerable, it's not just, can I share this story? Can I do it? Period. It's, can I trust what the outcome is going to be? And we can always trust the outcome to God, but we can't really ever trust the outcome to other people in knowing what they're going to do with it. So thanks for sharing that. I think that that's a really good example. So not all of our listeners are in racial or cultural minority, but probably all of them can relate to feeling lonely and sometimes feeling like they don't belong. So how do you encourage women to move into a place of belonging?
Yeah, I think, especially for my Asian American journey as a minority, because I felt like my readers aren't Asian, I felt like they wouldn't relate to it. And as a leader, I only want to talk about things that women can relate to. But I was wrong, because the more personal we can share about our journey, then the more people feel like they have permission to say, oh my gosh, like I get that. I get that when you step out of your house in your American body, when you're at home, your Chinese body, you're split. That's actually one of the first articles I wrote when I was starting to introduce my book to my readers. I said, it's this split identity of who I am at home and who I am in the world. And actually it became so fascinating because I was able to share about my Chinese culture at home and how that was different from my American culture. And then a lot of stories started coming in, as women wrote to me, and I have an online book club. People were like, I get that. My mother, she was, Italian American, or my mother was, she came from a, very German personality type family culture. And like, we didn't talk about our emotions. And it's like, it was so healing for me and also for the women. And like, okay, yeah, wow. Every culture has these kind of family code and taboos, and Irish American doesn't even matter anymore. It's like, wow, like it's so eye-opening to me. And so now I feel like so happy I can share my Chinese Asian American culture, and my sisters, whether they're Irish or English or American, whatever. I mean, we realize we're more united than ever. And so this world is so angry, it's so divisive. And I just feel like happy that we can share our stories and realize, wow, like we have more in common than we think. It's fun. Every chapter I put a different cultural vignette about the Chinese culture. Like for instance, the word heart in Chinese, it's a pictograph. So Chinese characters started off as pictures. And so it looks like the Chinese character for heart looks like a heart that has like beating heartbeats. And it's interesting. The word for happy in Chinese is kai xin. That means open heart. So the word for happy in Chinese literally is open heart. So we open our hearts. That's how we find happiness. So, these little cultural vignettes. And so it's fun as these early readers in our book club, they're like, wow, I didn't know that Chinese culture was so fascinating. So I think when we are, I guess, hiding those interesting cultural or your family growing up experience, I think I have finding belonging by sharing the things that I actually felt made me stick out. And I didn't share them because I felt it would keep me from belonging. But I found belonging by sharing those parts of myself.
Mm, that's so, so powerful, Bonnie. And I was just thinking, like you were saying earlier, when you are vulnerable and when you share those stories that someone says, me too. And it's like, oh yeah, or something like that. I have felt that, even if I haven't experienced that exact scenario in my life, I've felt that feeling that you felt in that scenario. And so, yeah, I think that concept of using our stories to find commonality with one another. And like you pointed out, rather than focusing on what is different about each other and the things that can divide us, what if we looked at where can we find the commonality? So I just love that idea.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Yeah, this one person, she is a military kid, and she's like, I totally relate to that. I mean, like what's going on in my family and at school, nobody else like has to move every few months or few years. So yeah, it's fascinating. The more we can personalize our experience of the truth, it's more powerful because we're united. So I'm not the kind of person that like protests. I'm not going to be out there with a sign. So even here in Silicon Valley, it's very diverse in California, but here in Mountain View where I live, where the headquarters of Google and LinkedIn, they're located. I have a female pastor friend. She was walking downtown Castro. A car drove by and somebody had frozen cans of soda and threw it at her head because they wanted to hurt her. And so, I don't tell that to shame anybody, but I'm telling you that it's real. And so for instance, like now I can't shop at Safeway at night. I used to just, how it is, at night after dinner, you're going to make a quick run. You don't have something at home. I can't do that. I'm afraid, even for me in this very diverse community, that they don't know that I'm American. They just see that my skin is Asian and they'll want to hurt me. In Chinatown, initially, I want to do a Chinatown tour on a Facebook Live with my readers. This is before anti-Asian hate, the way I envisioned this book. But I can't do that because, a bus stop I used to take as a little girl, just right there, next to the park in Chinatown. That's where somebody has been attacked recently. This elderly woman is just sitting there, just waiting for the bus. And somebody just came over and just started hitting and battering her. So these things are real. And I think that, the more that people can read the story, different parts of the country, it's not as diverse. They can read the story and know like, oh, wow. Now when I hear the news of Asian Americans being attacked, they go, oh, I know Bonnie. I know somebody that's Asian American. I think that just kind of brings us in unity that, it's okay. We don't have to be living in an area. There aren't that many Asian Americans. But I think just reading our stories of faith, it just brings this world so much closer and smaller, in a good way. Like, okay, I relate to my Christian brothers and sisters who are Asian. And it's not just Asian. I mean, any diversity, any minority, and realize, okay, this is just God showing up in different cultures. It's not like, okay, this person's different and I'm different. It's more like, this is just God of all nations. Like, wow, like we share the same faith journey, same leadership journey. Like, okay, it just shows up differently. And so I just want every woman who reads this to know that your stories matter. Your leadership journey matters. And so all the ways you don't feel like you belong, especially, even though my skin is Asian American, I feel like I'm American. And even in the church, I felt like lonely. And so it just goes to prove to you that loneliness is just a human condition. It doesn't matter what color you are. It's like, we're all lonely. Okay. And so once we share those pieces of loneliness, suddenly, wow, I'm no longer as lonely and I feel connected to you, whatever color you are. So we need to stand up and shine this. That's how we're going to combat divisiveness, is not just by we have the secret sauce. We have the secret. Girls, all we need to do is just share our humanity. And the scriptures say that you are a letter of Christ to be read by everyone. Well, who's that everyone? It doesn't necessarily mean everybody on Instagram. It doesn't mean everybody in politics. It means everyone in your life that you cross paths with. You are that living letter to them. So we don't need to be Instagram worthy or change the laws. I mean, people that are in places of influence politically, I mean, that's on them. Okay. But we are making a choice, a difference every day in our everyday lives. And that's what Jesus did. Jesus wasn't out there. Sorry, I'm getting real here, but Jesus was not out there focused on holding up signs. This is my personal opinion as a storyteller. You got to use your sphere of influence. If you are the person that holds up signs, all power to you. You got to do what God's called you to do. That's your sphere of influence. But most of us are not in that space. And so sometimes we can feel powerless. And I want to tell you that you have the power to affect light and salt. That is what's going to give us all a softer heart, a grace-filled heart, when we can love each other, help each other, put our arms around each other through this pandemic and saying hey, you're safe with me. You're a leader. It doesn't matter. You're still human. Come over. Let's have our tea. Come over. You can talk about hard things. I'm not going to judge you. And we're going to get through this together. That is what's going to bring salt and light and give the ability to just bring goodness into the world. So that's my personal take on all this division that's happening.
I'm so glad that you are talking about that, because that's definitely one of the things that we want to represent here is a diversity of different experiences and cultures. And we don't always get to do that. And so when we get to shine a light on these types of stories, that is one thing that we really want to represent here. And as we kind of wind down, there's one last topic that I'd like to broach with you, because I think it's so important for our listeners. You talk a lot about stress and finding rest and soul care. And the women that listen to our podcast are multi-passionate leaders who are active catalysts in so many areas of their life. So this idea of being stress-free Seems like something that's not real, right? So, what practical steps can you give our listeners to change that mindset, first of all, but also to actually find that rest in all of their chaos? And I say chaos, and sometimes that has a little bit of a negative connotation, but I just mean like with all the things we have going on, all the different places that we want to be effective and, share the gospel and share our leadership.
Oh, I love this question. It's like so core to like what's important to me as a leader now is that God says, you come first. The priority is your wellness. How can we be a light if we're constantly exhausted and drained and stressed out? God is saying, this is how it works in my kingdom. You're first. You're at the heart of my kingdom because the message is you. The message is you. And so out of your wellness and your ability to feel nurtured, that is where your words are going to flow, your energy, your whole being. So you need to prioritize your peace and your joy. It's not just love the Lord God with all your heart, mind, and soul, not just with our mind speaking the truth, which we do a lot as leaders. We need to speak the truth and we study the truth, not just with our heart. That's where we serve God. That's the seat of where we make decisions and align our decisions. And that's where we serve from, decision line, the truth. We need the soul. That's what soul care. It's saying all of this. Jesus said, come to me, those who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest for your soul, not just your mind, not just your heart. It's specifically your soul. So what gives you peace and joy is going to be unique to you. So amongst all the things that you have on your calendar in being responsible and fulfilling your calling, do not miss the most important part, which is your soul. What good is it if we gain the world? And for us as leader, that world might be of ministry or, whatever it is God's calling. What good is it if we gain the world? We do all those things on our checklist, but we lose our soul. Now, obviously not about salvation, but I'm applying to soul care. Like, what good is it if we're like lonely, we're feeling isolated and we're stressing out, we're anxiety. We're not experiencing the joy that we're giving to others. Like God's heart is breaking. He's like, oh my gosh, child, like I love you. It breaks my heart to see you like this. For those of you who have children or nieces or, nephews, like, how do you feel when you see a child just completely stressed out? I mean, you would not just say to that child, well, just get your homework done. Just like, I don't care how you feel, just keep going. No, God's heart is breaking. So we need to do things, take action, create space in our schedules to nurture who you are as God's beloved. The second book I wrote, Whispers of Rest, gives 40 different prayer practices and also soul care based on scientific research. So for instance, I never bought flowers for myself. I'm the kind of girl that likes to go by Safeway or Trader Joe's and buys flowers and drops them off at my friend's doorstep. Oh, because I have so much joy when I know other people have joy. Like, that's just like how I am. But I would never buy flowers for myself. It's kind of like I can buy a gallon of milk. I can buy cream cheese with that. Like, I don't need flowers. Okay. They only last a few days anyways, And so on my journey for healing and soul care, because my body was having anxiety and panic attacks, I actually had to learn how to help my body experience peace and joy, not just in my head, the knowledge. I needed to experience it. And so one of the research that I found is that when Jesus said, look at the flowers, there's something in that. Research shows that when we look at a flower, our bodies literally relax and feel better. Studies have shown that women that put flowers in their kitchen as the first thing they see in the morning, their levels of stress is lower and their mood is boosted throughout the day more than women who don't have flowers. So there's just something about the way God created our eyes that when we look at a flower, it actually helps us relax. And it's funny because now when I read Jesus says, look at the flowers, I literally take it. And not only that, now it's not just like self-care, like treat yourself, it's not like that kind of thing, but it's more like my Heavenly Father took the effort to make these beautiful flowers. And he said, I made them just to last a few days to let you know that you're worth it. That temporary moment of joy and peace you're worth it. So it matters how you feel. It matters if you have things in your life that give you joy. And then I would say, that's like a beginning of a journey of learning that our bodies are connected to how we feel. And that matters to God.
Oh, what a beautiful way to wrap us up, Bonnie. Thank you for being with us today. I know our listeners have enjoyed this as much as we have, and we will make sure the links to your website, your social media, and of course, your books that you've mentioned are in our show notes so they can come and connect with you and learn more from what you have to offer. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah. And just invite listeners to stand shoulder to shoulder with me as I release this book to say that every woman's story matters. So I just welcome you at sweetlikejasmine.com. There's a free guided journal that I used for my healing journey as a leader. And I offer it free as a gift because these are the very things that helped me to free my heart. And so it's my passion that you guys everyone listening, your stories matter. So thank you for this time, Holly and Esther.
Thank you so much. Hi, friend. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. We're so glad you took the time out of your day to listen, and I truly hope that it made an impact on your ability to lead well. If it did, would you consider sharing this episode with a friend? You could take a screenshot of the episode and share it on your social media, maybe an Instagram story or on Facebook, or you could just text the link to a friend. We would truly appreciate that, as when you share with a friend, it helps spread the word about the podcast, and it helps more women to be able to be impacted so that they can lead and love others well. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.